start off a new section of the course, which is to do with how data is stored on computing systems. The data ultimately needs to be stored in some stable storage, right. So we need storage that is not volatile. So we cannot be in memory of the computing systems, because computing systems may lose power and then lose data if it is there in the main memory. And the amount of data that typical databases hold will not anyway fit into main memory. So at any point of time, you may not need the whole of the data that is there in the database. You need to store some part of the database in the main memory. We will see how exactly the transfer of data from the non-volatile storage to the main memory will take place. So disks, these hard disks have been the mainstay of this non-volatile storage for a number of years. So these are relatively inexpensive storage, storage medium, and they are in fact also random access addressable devices. So we will see how exactly they are random access. Just like your memory is random access, these are also random access devices. A random access device is to be contrasted with serial kind of devices, which are actually not any longer being used, like tapes. Tapes are not random access, so they are to be you have to rotate the tape to an appropriate place before you can actually start using data from some segment of the tape. Now, there are of course advances that are taking place in storage technologies. So flash drives are already are available, and you can see that the flash drive based external drive disk storage is also available, right. So, but these things largely we are currently using them for personal backups and things like that. It is also possible to use them for database data storage, but as of today, though they do offer performance benefits, cost of these devices compared to the disks is actually pretty high. So I think for a few more, definitely a few more number of years, we will continue to use these magnetic medium based disk, hard disks for the this main storage of the for databases. Now, actually one more thing that you need to know is that in large enterprises, a single disks are not anymore used. Actually, it's a collection of disks that are used, and the collection is organized in such a way that it will give you faster access to the data, and also the failures of these disks can be tolerated, right. The data of a database has to be available to us at any point of time. Once we accept that we are going to manage this data, the data has to be available permanently for us. Right? We cannot afford to lose data at any point of time. So, but disks are electromagnetic devices. They do fade, and so we have to take adequate precautions to ensure that the data is available in spite of the failure of a single disk or sometimes multiple disks. So we will see how exactly we can address that issue a little later in the module. Right now, we will take up and understand a single disk, how it is, and then in general we will abstract out the lot of details about the disks, and then think of them as a medium that offers you a bunch of blocks, and then we will see how exactly we can organize information on these blocks. Now, one other important question that comes up in the context of management of storage management is that should the operating system on which the system is working, can't we make use of the operating system services as and then get the operating systems to kind of manage the disk space that the RDBMS actually needs. Now, you would have studied how paging systems have are to be implemented in the operating systems course, right? So how virtual memory organization is handled, and when a processor demands a particular data, how it is brought from the disk and is made available in the memory buffers, and how when a block or a page, it's also called page, right? A page is written by the process that they are under consideration. How is it again transferred back to the memory? All that, right? Now, and it has its own policies, right? So when to replace the so if there are you assume a buffer of pages available for in the main memory, and if you want to bring in a new page from the disk, and then you want to vacate some frame in the memory where you can put the new block, which of the frames to kind of empty. That's an issue. So there are some specific policies where you will use and then transfer certain pages will be transferred automatically by the operating system back to the disk, right? Least recently used and so on. You studied some policies there, right, in the operating systems course. So the main point about this from our perspective, from the database management system perspective, is that if you go by the route of the operating system, then the operating system has the control about when to transfer a page that is there on the main memory back to the disk. Whereas, okay, now the crucial question is this okay for us? And the answer for from the perspective of a database management system is that state of affairs is actually not acceptable for us. DBMS, the database management system, needs to really have very tight control on when a page that is being modified by the RDBMS system is actually transferred back to the disk. See, once it reaches the disk, then it's in permanent storage. It's in permanent storage. So, you recall that in the discussion for the database management systems, we made statements about when when the transactions run, when the transactions or logical pieces of work that the server accepts to do on behalf of an end user, like transferring money from one account to another account. And in reality, these operations consist of several sub operations, okay, which need to be performed on the database which is residing on the disk, etc. So, under these circumstances, you want to give a guarantee saying that this entire operation will be done in an atomic manner. That means it will be done entirely or it will be denied completely. You cannot have 1000 rupees reduced from A's account and not credited to B's account. You cannot stop the transaction somewhere in the middle, right? So, it has to be done in its entirety. So, this kind of guarantees are expected out of the RDBMS system when it does this transaction management. So, under these circumstances, if you update something in the main memory and the page that you have updated slips out of your control and goes to the disk, and you actually don't want it to go to the disk, you are in trouble. So, you really want to know when exactly it's going, and if it is going, then then you should know that it is going, and you should take appropriate measures for cancelling that in case it's necessary. What if the transaction has to be aborted in between? For some reason, if the transaction has to be aborted, then whatever partial work that it has done should not be visible for the end users at all. It should not affect the database on the disk. Ultimately, the database is on the disk or on the stable storage. So, these are, so we will appreciate these concerns when we actually talk about transaction management and error recovery in the next module that we are going to study. But as of now, we can assume that there are these issues related to transaction management, which have to be taken into consideration, and those things dictate that we actually need to have a very tight control on when pages move from the main memory to the disk, from the buffers to the disk. That's why most of the time RDBMS is actually takes control of a certain amount of disk space. So, it completely takes off the whole amount of disk space from the operating system and manages the disk space all by itself. Okay. So, this is the second option that I am talking about. Should RDBMS manage the disk space by itself? Yes, that's what is preferred, because we really need to have very tight control on when a buffer is returned to the disk. We will appreciate this when we actually study the error recovery mechanisms in transaction management module. Okay. So, now let us move on to looking at a single disk, and as I was telling you that we may actually not store data only in a single disk. We will see later on how to handle multiple disks and what are the issues that are there in multiple disks and things like that. Let us start studying a single disk. These are electromechanical devices. I am sure you would have used a external hard drive for backing up and things like that. In addition to the USB flash drives, you also sometimes, if you want a larger storage, you will actually buy a external hard drive, right. So, if you place a hand on your external hard drive, you can see the vibrations as it is operating. So, it is an electromechanical device. So, it has the structure inside is that there is a fixed some kind of a stand kind of thing, and then you have a rotating spindle. You have a rotating spindle. To the rotating spindle, we have lots of platters that are attached, circular plates that are permanently fixed attached, so that when the spindle rotates, the plates rotate. The plates rotate. So, these plates are also called platters. So, there are multiple platters on the spindle, and the spindle rotates at a speed of 7 to 10 to 12,000 rotations per minute. You can see how fast it rotates. It keeps spinning. So, they are called spinning discs. That's why we keep calling it spinning discs. They spin at very fast rates. The current spin rates are something like 12 to 15 RPM, rotations per minute. Now, so let us first look at the physical structure. So, we have this rotating spinning spindle to which lots of platters are attached, and then we have a head assembly, which has several read-write heads, and these read-write heads can actually be moved so that they can read some part of the disk. Okay, and the disk material is magnetically coated, so that you can electrically transform that to store a bit, and then you can read that and then figure out that there is a bit there. A 0 or 1 can be stored. The basic unit of course is 0 or 1. Now, so the important thing to remember here is that this read-write head has to be physically moved inside and outside, so that it can read a circle like this. So, if it is on this particular circle, it can read off bits from this particular circle. So, there is concentric circles. So, each of these things are actually called a track. Everything is called a track. Okay. So, when the read-write head is positioned on a particular track, then it can read off bits from that track. Okay. It has a sensor through which you can read the. Now, how many tracks are there? You will be very surprised that there are actually very densely packed tracks there, something like 10,000 per inch, right. So, an inch is 2.5 per centimeters, right. So, within 2.5 per centimeters, you have 10,000 of these tracks. So, you can see how closely they are positioned. And so, each of these, this read-write head has to position itself on exactly one of those tracks. So, it has to be very precisely controlled, and stepper motors are used in order to position that on exactly one track. Now, the tracks are optionally sometimes partitioned into what are called sectors. If it is there, sectors are hardwired when the device is manufactured, but it is optional to keep sectors. But the track is of course the most important thing. So, and now if it has sectors, either the sectors or the entire track itself is divided into blocks. A block is the basic unit of data transfer from the disk. Okay, and these blocks are the ones that are given certain numbers. So, there are a number of blocks within each track, and those blocks are numbered, and you can actually ask for a particular block number, and then that block will be read for you. Now, another interesting thing here is that these things are all fixed to a particular mechanism. So, they all move in unison, okay. So, it is not the case that this read-write head is on one track and this other read-write head is on another track. That is not possible. These are not independently moving read-write heads. They all move in unison, okay. And so, at any point of time they are on the ith track, say 100th track on all the platters. On all the platters they are on the 100th track, okay. So, now you can imagine that this 100th track on all the platters is in some sense forms a virtual cylinder. It is a cylinder, right? Okay. So, within this cylinder we have so many surfaces. So, we are on 100th track, let us say. So, 100th track on surface 1, and then each surface actually has, each platter has two surfaces, the top surface and the bottom surface. So, both surfaces are actually used for storing data. Okay. So, that is why this has two arrowheads. You can see that it can either read that or read this. Okay. But most interesting thing is, you should remember that at any one point of time we are only reading one track of one surface. We are not simultaneously reading several tracks. So, that means what? So, one of these read-write heads, there is a read-write head per surface, right. So, one of these read-write heads will be electronically chosen. It will be electronically activated, so that information from that particular read-write head starts coming out. Okay. You can switch between this track to this track in a jiffy, because it's electronic switching. It's electronic switching. You just switch off this sensor and then switch on this sensor. Then you will start reading from that surface, and then stop reading there, and then start reading some other surface. So, it's possible to do that. So, that is why we will think of the 100th track that is there on all surfaces as some kind of a virtual cylinder, and then we can actually read off several blocks from this virtual cylinder one after the other. Okay. Once you are on surface 1, so how does the reading actually happen? This only moves this way in a horizontal manner. So, suppose it is on the 100th track, it will stay fixed there. and now the read-write head is fixed and the platter is spinning. So you basically, if you are looking for the 100th block on that particular track, then you basically wait for that 100th block to pass over you in this process of rotation, and then once it starts processing over you, you will start picking up bits. That is how data transfer happens. So, and the unit of data transfer is one block, okay, and the size of the block ranges from half a kilobyte to something like 8 kilobytes. 8 kilobytes. A kilobyte is 1024 bytes. So, something like 512 bytes to 8 kilobytes. That is the kind of typical sizes. So, this is fixed, and this is set at the initialization time for the or the formatting of the other disk, and you cannot dynamically change it or anything like that. Once a block is fixed, it will be permanent as long as you are using the disk. Now, let us look at what is an address of a block. So, I told you it is a random accessible device. So, it will the disk controller actually accepts a block address. A block address consists of the surface number, the cylinder number, and the block number. Surface number can also be thought of as a track number, you can also call it like that. But it is the cylinder that actually decides, cylinder number is the one that decides what is the track. So, there are 10,000 tracks here. So, there are 10,000 virtual cylinders. So, a cylinder number will be given, and then within that cylinder which track you are reading, because it consists of as many tracks as there are surfaces here. So, that is why you need a surface number, cylinder number, and within that track what is the block number that you are interested in. So, then the data transfer will actually take place. So, in order for the data transfer to take place, what you need to do is to move the read-write head to that particular cylinder. So, the read-write head might be somewhere here, and you are asking for the 100th thing. So, the entire assembly has to be moved to that place. Okay. This is what is called the seek time. You have to seek the appropriate cylinder. This is the one that actually takes, this is a physical movement based on stepper motor. So, this is the one that actually takes a longer time. So, it is about 10 to 12 14 milliseconds it takes for you to move to a appropriate track. It also of course depends on where you are starting. If you are starting at one place and then you have to pass over 500 tracks, then it obviously takes longer time to go. And then you basically the switching this surface number is actually used to switch the read-write head appropriately. Okay. So, you have to depending on the surface number, you set the read-write head from where you are reading out. Then you basically after moving to that particular cylinder, you wait for the appropriate block number to pass over the read-write head. And how long does it take to pass over? It will take one rotation, maximum one rotation. Okay. So, one rotation is about 3 to 4 milliseconds because it is making 10 to 12,000 rotations per minute, per second, sorry, RPM or RPM, it is RPM, sorry, rotations per minute. So, from this RPM that is given, we can calculate how much is time it takes to do one rotation. So, one rotation time is what it can maximum take for you to get the block under your read-write head sensor. So, this is what is called rotational delay. So, there is a seek time where you need to go to the appropriate track, and there is a rotational delay where you will wait for the appropriate block to come under the read-write head sensor. And once it comes, there is a transfer time, but the transfer time is so little, so you will actually ignore that. The transfer time is when you are transferring this 4,000 kilobytes, the block size let us say is 4,000 kilobytes, then you have to transfer this 4096 bytes from the surface. That happens in SGP, so you really don't bother too much. This is compared to this, it will be very small. So, the access time is modeled as seek time plus rotational delay. Now, you will notice one thing, that now the blocks on a particular cylinder, there is a cylinder, right, virtual cylinder, the blocks that are there on that cylinder, in some sense they are all closer to each other from an access point of view, from access time point of view. Do you agree with that? From an access time point of view, all these blocks that are sitting on a virtual cylinder are closer to each other compared to another set of blocks that are sitting on the other cylinders. Because the moment you switch from the 10th cylinder to the 50th cylinder, the read rate head has to be moved. Okay. So, but as long as you are in the same cylinder, on the same cylinder, and you are asking for different blocks on the same cylinder, all that you are doing is if necessary switch the surface numbers and then wait for the block to come under the read write head. You do not have to move the read write. There is no seek time involved as long as you are reading blocks from the same cylinder. You get that? So, that is why we will say that the blocks on a particular cylinder are in some sense closer to each other from a access time point of view. And so if you want, if a file wants say 500 blocks, then you try to allocate all those 500 blocks on a particular cylinder. Do not put them on one surface. If you put it on a surface, then the read rate head has to keep moving like this, on the surface. It is a bit dangerous. Instead, what we will do is to put them on the cylinder. So, if you place them on the cylinder, then read rate head will go to that cylinder first and then probably switch between the platters and then pick up. So, there are so many, let us say there are 20 platters, some 10 platters, let us say. So, you have 10 tracks available to you, right. On those 10 tracks there are so many blocks. So, within those blocks you try to put your file. Okay. So, from an abstract point of view, the blocks on the same cylinder are kind of closer to each other. And if you start ordering them on that particular access time point of view, then the cylinder I blocks are close to each other, and after that it is the closest bunch of blocks are on cylinder I plus 1, the very next cylinder, and then and so on the next cylinder. So, when you have to pick up or ask for a consecutive, in some sense a consecutive set of blocks, then you will pick blocks from cylinder 1, then cylinder 2 and cylinder 3, etc. Okay. So, from a abstracting away all these, it is actually such a amazing thing that on a small about a 1.5 centimeters height, we have so many platters, and then the platters are rotating at such high speeds, and then certain read write head goes inside these platters, and then the probability of this read write head touching the platter is very high actually. But then it actually is a fantastic piece of engineering that it actually works, and then and as it works, it actually generates small amount of dust particles. As it ages, it starts generating slight dust particles. The whole assembly is actually hermetically sealed. The whole thing is hermetically sealed. So, anything from outside will not enter. But inside there can be certain particles that are getting generated, and so slowly the air quality changes, so to say. Okay. So, there are I met a colleague in chemical engineering who spent a huge number of years studying the ecosystem inside the disk. He was working in IBM, In these disks, how exactly the as the disk gets used, how does the whole inside thing, the air changes and things like that. So based on that, they will be able to tell predictions about what is the mean time to failure, when is it likely to fail. So the failures in hard disks typically happen when the read-write head crashes onto the surface. Once the read-write head crashes onto the surface, then surface crashes will happen and the whole assembly will not work properly. So we will look at the failure probabilities and other things a little later. But right now, let's understand that we can abstract out all these things and then assume that this secondary storage is controlled by a disk controller, and what the disk controller will do for you is to take a disk address and then a buffer address in memory, and then you transfer that block of the block of data, which is about say 4 kilobytes, onto this buffer in about, depending on where the read-write head right now is, things like that. So it may take on the average 10 to 12 milliseconds for you to get back that 4 kilobytes data. Okay, that's a lot of time, right? For us, I mean, when the processors are running at 2.5 gigahertz or something like that, so the memory operations are happening so fast, milliseconds look like centuries, right? So that is the one of the main issues that we have to bother about. Now let's look at how so we will all be looking at file organizations. So before we do that, what do we place on files? It is the data records that we place on the files. So, and what are the kinds of data records that are possible? There can be either fixed length record types, where each field is of fixed length. You know the length of the field, so it takes so many 25 bytes. Okay, 25 bytes. This field takes 25 bytes. Next field takes 30 bytes. Next field takes 40 bytes, etc. You know the length of the fields. So such kind of thing, if you have 10 fields in the record, then you know you can add up the field sizes, and then you will get the record length. So you know how much exactly what the record takes, how many number of bytes it takes. So the advantage with this kind of records is that within the a file is nothing but a sequence of bytes for us. A file is nothing but a sequence of these bytes basically. Okay, so within that sequence of bytes, you can actually precisely locate as to where your record starts, because you can calculate how many bytes to move before you can pick up your record, because all records are of fixed length. So if each record is taking 100 bytes, then you know that the fifth record starts after 400 bytes, right? So you can use the record number. Suppose you are given the record number, you can precisely calculate which byte it starts from and then start reading from that byte onwards. Now these number of records that are there and the length of each of these fields, all this information has to be stored in the file header. A lot of information gets stored in file header. So when you are doing a file management, you will first read the file header and then figure out the meta information about how information is organized in the file, and then start operating that file. Okay. So so as against this fixed length records, we have variable length record files also. I mean, we're looking at basically just data records. We have fixed length records and variable length records. So variable length records, they do arise because there can be some missing fields, and there can be some repeating fields in a particular file, and there can be variable length. A field is naturally modeled as a variable length value. So if this is the case, then we need to put some special separator symbols to indicate as to what are the field boundaries. where one field has ended and where another field is starting. So, if you imagine a record as a sequence of bytes, then if you do not have fixed length records, obviously fixed length fields, obviously, then when a field ends, you should know when it ended. So, you need some end markers for the fields. So, you need separator symbols to indicate when the field and then you also now require separator symbols to figure out when the record has ended. Okay. So, a record, and what are these separator symbols that are used to indicate the field field separation and the record separation, that also has to be recorded in the file header. And how many number of records are there, what are the separator symbols used, etc. All this information again has to be there in the file header. Okay. Now, so now records are sequences of these fields. Fields are nothing but sequence of bytes, and so you have records. A sequence of these records is what is a file is, right? And so now you have to organize this information on the disk. So since the unit of transfer from the non-volatile storage to the main memory is at disk, so we will be packing these records into blocks, into units which are of block size, so that these units can be actually stored as blocks on the disk. Okay. So if there are two cases here, if the record length is much less than the block size, which is usually the case in enterprise information systems, where you typically have employee records, student records, and things like that. So you don't have photographs, you don't have music, things like that. Then record lengths are likely to be less than the block size. And so in this context, we define what is called the blocking factor. The blocking factor is the maximum number of records of a particular file that can be stored in a block. What is since the block size is fixed for the disk, so what is and the record length is available to us. So you can divide the block size by the record length, and then we usually take a policy of not to store a fraction of the record into a block. So you usually store the whole of record into a block, and so you will take the floor of this number, block size divided by the record length, and then you get a number. So that number is the maximum number of records that you can store in a block. So you will pack records into block size units, and then you put integral records into these things. You don't put a fraction of a record into these units, and now you have your file, which is a sequence of records, is divided into these units. Each of them are block size. Now you are going to store these sequence of blocks, file blocks, they are called file blocks, onto the disk. Okay. So that's how we will organize the file onto the disk. Now the record length could be greater than the block size if you are actually using some media elements and things like that, in which case of course it will be something like this. Yes, what is called a spanned organization has to be used. That means record 1 starts in one block, and then it stops somewhere in the middle of the second block, and then the second record starts there, and then it goes on and so on. So you will have to use extra information to figure out when how many blocks are being used per record, and where a block is ending, etc. Where a record is ending. Okay. So the usual case is that record length is much less than the block size. So we will in most of our considerations, we will assume this case where a spanned organization is not needed. We will assume that an integral number of records are placed in a block, and the blocking factor indicates the maximum number of records. Now, once you imagine that a file which is a sequence of records is broken into these units. So, you have file blocks. Now, these file blocks have to be stored on the disk. So, you will map these file blocks, which is a sequence of blocks containing all the records of the file, onto the disk block. Okay. Now, what are the various ways you can map these file blocks onto the disk block? It is possible for you to keep the first block of the file on some disk block, place the second one on some other disk block, etc. Right? So, you can do that. As against that, you can do what is called continuous allocation. That means consecutive file blocks are stored in consecutive disk blocks. What do you mean by consecutive disk blocks? The consecutive disk blocks are the disk blocks that are lying on the same cylinder. Okay. Blocks on the same cylinder are thought of as consecutive blocks, because they are in some sense consecutive from an access time point of view. Okay. So, if your file has 5000 blocks, then you will try to place them on cylinder 5 and cylinder 6, cylinder 7, like that, depending on how many blocks are there available in each cylinder. Now, if you do this, the scanning of the file is very fast, because once you start reading from a cylinder, you can read some, say, a large number of blocks from that particular cylinder itself of the file. Okay. So, reading will be very fast, and we can also use what is called double buffering technique in order to make use of this fast file scanning. That means you can ask the disk controller to start filling one buffer, and then while it is filling this buffer, you can actually use a previous buffer that was given to the disk block earlier, disk controller earlier, to fill the previous block. So, while you are using that block, the next block will be filled by the disk controller. So, you can use some buffers and then. But the disadvantage of this kind of a contiguous allocation is that in case you have to expand your file and then insert some new block in the middle of that sequence, there is some kind of a sequence in which you have organized your records of a file. So, for some reason, let us say you want to introduce a new block into the file, then you are in trouble, because you have put these file blocks on contiguous disk blocks, and if you want to maintain this policy, then you will have to read off a lot of disk blocks and then again write them back after inserting this new block. So, expanding the file will be a little difficult while keeping this thing. So, as against this, there is what is called a linked allocation. In a linked allocation, each of these file blocks is stored on some disk block, and then so the file block 1 is stored on some disk block, file block 2 is stored on some other disk block, then there is a pointer from the first disk block to the second disk block, saying that the next file block is actually stored there. So, these pointers are not memory obviously not memory pointers, they are disk pointers. A disk pointer is nothing but a disk address. So, you store the file first block of the file onto some disk block, and then store a pointer to tell in that block to tell as to where the next file block is located. What is the disk address of the block where the next file block is? Okay.